Welcome back, everybody. It's the Fantasy Football Strategist back at you with a new video. In today's video, we're going to be breaking down 5 potential buy low candidates for you at quarterback. This is going to be more so geared towards a superflex or 2 QB setting as opposed to 1 QB. And 1 QB, you just want your highest of the high upside quarterbacks. And some of these low end QB2s, QB3s just really aren't that valuable because you don't need to have multiple quarterbacks and you can't even start multiple quarterbacks. But I'm going to be trying to have a couple higher, mid, and low price quarterbacks for you in this video, depending on what you need. So without further ado, let's get into it. And so the first candidate is going to be CJ Stroud of the Houston Texans. So he's 6'3", 214 pounds. He's 23 years and 4 months old right now, so he is very young. After a historic rookie season in which he had 18.7 points per game, which is good for QB7 overall, he sunk majorly in year 2. Now, remember, prior to last season, I was saying he was one of the biggest sell-high candidates imaginable because, he was being drafted as the QB3 and the 3rd overall startup pick in fantasy drafts, which he is a very good quarterback. It's just understand that, without the rushing upside, which he is capable of running, he just really doesn't like to and doesn't. It's, you're just making a terrible bet in terms of expecting somebody to maintain high-end QB1 fantasy output without that rushing upside. Well, like I said, in year 2, he had 13.7 points per game, which is 28th in the league. Now, I think he's definitely more talented than this, and I think that this is going to be a potential buy low opportunity for us. Now, taking a look at his depth chart, he still has Joe Mixon at running back. We like that. Dameon Pierce is an adequate backup. Now, his wide receiver 1, Nico Collins, is signed with the team long term, but he has had injuries in each of the past 2 seasons, and so he hasn't necessarily been the most dependable, but he is an elite wide receiver 1 when he plays. Christian Kirk was signed to the team via free agency. He is a tremendous slot receiver. He did miss the end of this past season with injury. They were trying to trade him before the trade deadline this past year, but he got hurt. So I think he's going to be a reliable chain mover. Tank Dell is going to be out at least this season, potentially even into next year. And who knows what he looks like after that devastating knee injury. Prayers up to Tank Dell. In terms of their tight end situation, Dalton Schultz is average, not particularly high on him. And their offensive line is very bad as well. Now, they signed Cam Robinson to replace Laramie Tunsil, who they traded away. So they definitely have some building to do in the NFL draft. So I think that's going to be something they stress heavily. And I also think that they're probably going to look to address wide receiver as well, or potentially tight end. Whatever they can do to get another asset in the passing game. And so like I mentioned earlier, CJ Stroud, depending on your league settings, was the QB 11 in only 15 games as a rookie. That's impressive. But then this past season in 17 full games, he was the QB 18. That is a significant dip. I think a lot of this was to do with Bobby Slowick and his inability to adapt. And so I think that teams figured him out and he didn't really have any answers. Now, they signed Nick Caley to be the new offensive coordinator, former passing game coordinator of the Los Angeles Rams. Now, the Rams scheme is one of the metas in the NFL right now, so it definitely helps to have one of the metas in terms of your OCs. But it will be interesting to see if he's a good offensive coordinator because just because, you were the Rams passing game coordinator, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're incredible at calling plays. And so finally, I have 3 trades that were made involving CJ Stroud that were made within the past 16 days. Now, one thing I'm going to mention right now is I can't help or know your own league economy. Only you know that. I'm just saying that in terms of these potential deals, I would definitely take the CJ Stroud side of them. The first one made 5 days ago was CJ Stroud for the 103 and Joe Milton. I would easily take CJ Stroud. I think he is better than any quarterback in this class. Now, the upside potentially of a Cam Ward could potentially be more than CJ Stroud, but in terms of getting the sure thing, I would personally just take CJ Stroud, and this was in a Superflex 12-team format. Joe Milton, he might end up starting somewhere at some point, but there's no guarantee of that whatsoever. And from the Patriots' perspective, I would just rather have somebody that could potentially be a backup to Drake May than give them away. So the 103, I think, is a fantastic buying point. I would easily send the 103, and Joe Milton's not going to get in the way of that either. Now, in terms of the second trade, I have CJ Stroud for Cortland Sutton and A.J. Brown. Now, A.J. Brown is still 27 years old. He's going to be 28. He's still a wide receiver 1, and I don't want to discredit him. He's not going to go away anytime soon. But, he is starting to lose value, which is due to ageism, whether or not you personally agree with that. And also Cortland Sutton, who is, he flashed some wide receiver 1 ability this past year and, in spurts, but he's also on the older side of things. And I definitely think the Broncos are probably going to bring in more pass catchers. So I think that could potentially hurt him as well. And in terms of having CJ Stroud, I would just much rather have CJ Stroud than Cortland Sutton and AJ Brown, especially in a 12-team format. Now, another one from 16 days ago was Jalen McMillan and the 2025 105 for CJ Stroud. Jalen McMillan, he had unsustainable touchdown production at the end of this past year, which I think is propping up his fantasy value. I don't think he's a bad receiver by any means, but he's also the wide receiver 3 now in the Bucs with them re-signing Godwin. And then the 105, I would much rather just have CJ Stroud. So it's really CJ Stroud for the 105 and the wide receiver 3 on the Bucs. And so, yeah, I would much rather have CJ Stroud than Jalen McMillan in the 2025 105. The second potential buy low candidate is Caleb Williams of the Chicago Bears. So he's 6'1", 214 pounds. He is on the shorter side of being a quarterback, but he does have the ability to see over the middle of the field. He isn't that short. He's 23 years and 3 months old, so still a very young quarterback. Now, in terms of fantasy points per game, his 15.3 were 21st this past season. Now, I was guilty of saying this as well, so I'll take ownership. I thought he was walking into potentially the best situation imaginable for a rookie quarterback. He had all of the passing game assets in terms of Cole Kmet, Rome Odunze, Keenan Allen, DJ Moore. He even had DeAndre Swift. Now, the offensive line was atrocious. Caleb's inability to get the ball out and always looking for the big play was a huge detriment to the team as well. But I want to say the play design by Shane Waldron was terrible. He had receivers in the same area. They couldn't get any run game going. And so it was made very difficult for Caleb. Well, let's take a look at why he might be a good buy low candidate. And so as far as the depth chart's concerned, they did potentially lose Keenan Allen. We'll see if they end up re-signing him or not. But he still has Rome Odunze, DJ Moore, Cole Kmet. And now in terms of the interior of the offensive line, which was atrocious, they signed multiple free agents, including signing Drew Dahlman at center. They have Joe Tooney, they have Jonah Jackson, along with Braxton Jones and Darnell Wright to be the left tackle and right tackle. This offensive line is completely revamped, and they have the 10th overall pick. Now, the Bears have been potentially linked to Ashton Genty, Will Campbell. Some of these offensive tackles, I think, all would be decent candidates here for them because their offense looks very good on paper. And now it is just paper. But they also signed Ben Johnson to be their HC. Ben Johnson is one of the best play callers in the entire NFL. He said he's going to strip down the playbook entirely and build it around Caleb Williams' strengths and really everyone in the offense. And I tend to believe him because, yes, while the Lions do have one of the best, if not potentially the best offensive lines in the NFL, he also used everybody to their strengths. If you don't know how to use people to their strengths, it really doesn't matter necessarily the talent they have. Now, another reason I think Caleb is a good buy low candidate is despite the terrible situation he found himself in, and a lot of that, once again, was his own fault, he still didn't throw many interceptions. He was particularly safe with the ball. There were potential reasons for that, such as Matt Eberflus telling him to be careful and watch the turnover margin. But I will say another thing is he's probably due for some positive regression in the run game because despite having almost 500 rushing yards, he didn't have a single rushing touchdown. He did have one called back by a penalty on the other side of the offense this past season, so he potentially could have had one. But I want to say, when you consider the dysfunction the Bears had, including a lack of a running game, for him to finish this high in fantasy, I think there is a max upside that is in that Mahomes range that we've seen from time to time, especially with the offensive line being revamped, them still having all these assets in terms of their playmakers, along with the coaching of Ben Johnson. Now, taking a look at a couple of trades here, remember, I can't help whether or not your league will or will not accept these trades. These are real trades that were made within the past 8 days, though. Caleb Williams was traded straight up for J.J. McCarthy. Remember that McCarthy missed his entire rookie season with that meniscus tear. There were reports that he's a bit of a mixed bag in camp before that. We saw some high-level preseason play from McCarthy and then some questionable throws as well. Well, with Caleb, we definitely saw that he did have some rough games for sure, but he did have multiple game-winning or tying potential drives. Whether or not his team squandered that isn't really necessarily his fault, but he was part of the reason why they were in those situations. Nonetheless, I think with the probable upgrade in coaching to Ben Johnson, that it's definitely arguable that Ben Johnson and KOC are reasonably close in terms of play calling ability. In terms of the passing game assets, I think they're both definitely relatively good, relatively equal as well. But in terms of the injury history, Caleb Williams just does not have this injury history, and he has that 101 job security. With J.J. McCarthy, he just does not have that type of draft capital, even though he was a first-round pick. So I definitely would lean Caleb Williams here, and I definitely think he has the higher rushing floor and ceiling, which is definitely something we look for in fantasy. Now, the second trade made 5 days ago was A.J. Brown and Geno Smith for Caleb Williams. Geno Smith, he's definitely getting older. We don't really know how long he's going to be playing. A.J. Brown should still have a ton of value. He is definitely a wide receiver 1. He's 27, going to be 28, so he's just losing market value. If I can have Caleb Williams straight up, because A.J. Brown is, I believe, a 4th-round startup pick, maybe a 3rd round, but probably a 4th. Caleb Williams is a 2nd-round startup pick, and then Geno Smith is way further down. I think the value is heavily leaning towards the Caleb Williams side. And then 8 days ago, Caleb was sold straight up for the 103. Listen, there is nobody with the ceiling of Caleb Williams, in my opinion, in this draft coming up. I think Cam Ward has a tremendous ceiling as well. I don't think it's quite as good as Caleb Williams because I don't think he's quite the athlete that Caleb is. But nonetheless, depending on your league market, you might not even be able to get Cam Ward. So for the 103 straight up, I would much rather have Caleb Williams. And I want to give a special shout out to my Patreon members. Thank you to Big Hunt, SP, Major Jack, and Infamy MTG. If you would like to become a member, I'm going to leave a link in the comment section. As far as what you'll gain, you'll get access to a private Discord server. I'm going to have a real life and fantasy football chat where we talk about real life NFL news. Any questions you might have will be answered in the real life NFL chat. And as far as the fantasy football chat, we'll talk about what's happening in the fantasy world. I'll give you team reviews, give you optimal roster construction based on your specific league settings, trades you can make to strengthen your roster, buying and selling points, specifically price points for various players based on your positions of need. I'll give you a special shout out, obviously, on all of these videos. You'll get early access to videos. You'll be part of private live streams that are not available to regular YouTube members. And you will also have the ability to suggest videos specifically for you on Patreon. I've already made one on Isaac Rendo as per request by one of my Patreon members. And so once again, if you would like to join, the link is going to be in the comment section. Thanks. Now, the third potential buy low candidate is going to be Kenny Pickett of the Browns. Is he very good? I don't think so, but he's still reasonably young, being under 27. The Cleveland Browns have the 2nd overall pick, and there is the potential that they don't end up taking a quarterback at number 2 and go with him as their starter for the short time. In terms of his points per game, he didn't really have enough of a sample size this past year, but he had 12.2 and 9.5. Now, I'm not arguing that he's going to be a high-end quarterback for you, but he is a quarterback that could potentially get some starts, and you could get him for basically nothing. Now, in terms of the situation around him, Deshaun Watson tore his Achilles. He's probably gone, honestly. So that leaves Kenny Pickett as the only other quarterback on the roster right now. Now, they do have the 2nd pick, like I said, so they potentially could get Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders. I think Ward's going 1st overall. They could go Shedeur Sanders. I don't think he's worthy of the 2nd pick, in my opinion. They could take him, though. But they've also been linked to Abdul Carter a significant amount, and pairing him on the other side of Myles Garrett would be insane. Yeah, that would be terrible. I would not want to face, as a Ravens fan, I hope the Browns take Shedeur Sanders instead of Abdul Carter. I don't want anything to do with Lamar Jackson having to deal with these two guys on one team. Now, when you take a look at the depth chart as well, Jerome Ford isn't really particularly great. I do expect them to address running back in the draft here. But Jerry Jeudy, with Jameis Winston, did show out a little bit. So did Cedric Tillman. I think that in terms of passing game options, you could definitely do worse than that. And David Njoku is one of the better tight ends. So in terms of the passing game assets that he has, assuming they get a running back upgrade, I think this would be fantastic for Kenny Pickett. And really, it just remains to be seen as to whether or not they take a quarterback at 2, because if they don't, I definitely think there's a chance that Kenny Pickett gets some starts. Now, taking a look at some trades here, once again, I can't help whether or not your league will accept trades like these. Just today, for a 2027 4th-round pick, Kenny Pickett and Luke Schoonmaker were sold. Kenny Pickett has a legitimate chance at starting as of now, and a backup tight end with some upside over a 4th-round pick 3 years from now. I would much just rather have Kenny Pickett, honestly. The 4th-round hit rate is, I think, about 3%. The second trade made 2 days ago was Kenny Pickett for the 401 in 2025. The 401 probably isn't going to amount to much of anything. Now, this was a 10-team league, so it's a little bit higher than it would be in a 12-team format, but still not very valuable and very unlikely to hit. I would much rather have Kenny Pickett, at least right now. And then 6 days ago, Kenny Pickett was sold for Hendon Hooker. Kenny Pickett has a much better chance of starting than Hendon Hooker does. Hendon Hooker is not going to be replacing Jared Goff, right? Kenny Pickett, could potentially be the starter. So all things equal, I would just much rather have Kenny Pickett. Now, taking a look at the fourth potential buy low candidate, it's Trevor Lawrence of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So he's 6'6", 220, prototypical size. He was selected first overall in 2021. Now, he's still only 25 years and 4 months old, so still relatively young. And each of the past 3 seasons, he's had 17.9, which is good for 12th overall, 17.3, which is 13th overall, and 15.2, which is 22nd overall points per game. Now, this past season, the stats are a little bit skewed because against the Houston Texans, for instance, he played a little bit of the game and then got knocked out. So I definitely think that would have been a little bit higher without that game being put in there. But nonetheless, he had terrible coaching, and until this past season as well, he didn't even have a wide receiver 1 on his team. This guy was working with straight up bums, with the exception of, Evan Ingram, who's a fine tight end, and then you had Christian Kirk, who, would be a fine number 2 to number 3 on a team, but probably shouldn't have been a wide receiver 1. Now, taking a look at the Jacksonville Jaguars depth chart, obviously they have T-Law. Now, they have Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby, who are a decent running back duo. We'll see if they address running back in the draft. Etienne has looked a little bit worse for the wear the past couple seasons. Now, at wide receiver, like I said, until this past season, they didn't even have a wide receiver 1. Well, now they have Brian Thomas Jr. He is electric. I think he's going to be a dominant force for us in fantasy and in real life if you're a fan. Gabe Davis is fine. He's a better NFL wide receiver than a fantasy football asset. But yeah, De'Ami Brown, nothing special. Parker Washington. I definitely think they address wide receiver in the draft. And they also let Evan Ingram go, and they're promoting Brenton Strange, at least for now, to being the starter. I definitely think he has some upside for us in fantasy. He could be a volume magnet. Now, as far as coaching, Liam Cohen is now their head coach. He is a very creative play caller. And so one thing that they have not had is good play calling. They would not make the most of their playmakers in the passing game. I think he is going to get the most out of Trevor Lawrence and Brian Thomas Jr. Baker Mayfield 2 years ago had that resurgence. Well, his play this past season was significantly better than it was with Dave Canales, and he was great with Dave Canales. I mean, Liam Cohen got Will Levis drafted as high as he did. And now, in terms of Trevor Lawrence as well, he brings the rushing upside that we like to see. You'll see that he has multiple seasons with at least 300 rushing yards, almost 3, and despite this past season not playing enough games, but he also has multiple rushing touchdowns every single year. This guy has the rushing upside that we need to potentially be a QB1, and I definitely think, as you're going to see, that you could get him for much cheaper than he should be worth. Now, taking a look at a couple of trades from the past couple of days, Tua was swapped straight up for Trevor Lawrence. Now, Trevor has missed some time as well, but Tua has severe concussion issues. He has missed time all but 1 season, multiple games with concussions. I think there is a lot more risk with Tua than there is with T-Law, and I think the upside, specifically the rushing upside, is so much higher with T-Law that I think also the maximum upside is higher than that of Tua. And T-Law finally has the coaching upgrade that Tua's had for plenty of years now. Now, also a day ago, he was swapped straight up for Chase Brown. Chase Brown is a running back who really was not that great. He received a lot of volume, specifically in a PPR format, which helped boost his total production. But also remember that he just doesn't have that draft capital associated with him. In terms of T-Law for Chase Brown, T-Law has so much more security with that contract and all the offensive upgrades he's going to have received. I would easily rather have T-Law than Chase Brown, and he's selected earlier in startups. And also 4 days ago, he was swapped straight up for the 105. I don't think at the 105 you're going to get a Trevor Lawrence. I highly doubt it. I think that Cam Ward could potentially have more upside than Trevor Lawrence. We'll see if he ends up hitting. But yeah, if you need a quarterback and you can swap the 105, I would much rather have Trevor Lawrence if I'm in need of a quarterback. And so the 5th and final candidate is Daniel Jones of the Indianapolis Colts. Remember that he's 6'5", 221 pounds. He has a prototypical size. He's a little bit under 28 years old. Now, in terms of his points per game, 3 years ago, his 18.4 were good for 10th. 2 years ago, his 10.5, it wasn't really enough of a sample size. He had the injury. And then this past year, his 14.2 and basically half a season were good for 25th. Now, he was a part of the severe dysfunction of the New York Giants. Now, he was a reason or part of it for the dysfunction. But as a member of the Indianapolis Colts, I definitely think this is a place where he could potentially thrive in terms of the, offensive line and the weapons around him, as well as the coaching, that he just did not have to at least some degree in New York. And so taking a look at his career, he definitely hasn't been a high-end fantasy asset for the most part, but he did have that one QB9 finish where he had over 700 rushing yards and 7 touchdowns. But you'll notice that he's had over 200 yards a couple of times, over 400 yards another time, and he's had multiple rushing touchdowns in various seasons as well. And so I think for the price point that you're going to see in a minute, I think he is a good buy. Now, why do I think he's a good buy besides that? Well, he's now on the Colts. Anthony Richardson is the quarterback ahead of him, who, despite being picked 4th overall, was thrown into being a starter immediately, even though it was known that he was a project. Then he got hurt. Then when he came back this year, the output from him was questionable at times. He took himself out of a game. Well, when he wasn't hurt, he was just tired. There have been questions about his work ethic. His leash is definitely getting shorter. But now, if you put Daniel Jones in there, with Jonathan Taylor at running back, Michael Pittman, Alex Pierce, Josh Downs, A.D. Mitchell, we'll see if they get a tight end. They've been linked to potentially drafting a tight end in the first round. That would be a fantastic situation for Daniel Jones, along with the offensive line being the best he's ever worked with. I think there is a ton of potential for Daniel Jones should he be able to get some starts. And with what we've seen from Anthony Richardson and his durability issues, there seems to be, in my estimation, a decent chance. And finally, taking a look at 3 trades made within the past 7 days here. Daniel Jones was sold straight up for the 311 in 2025. You have a chance at hitting at the 311. That's basically a 4th round pick. The chances you get something good probably aren't that high, even in a draft class like this with a lot of depth at running back. Daniel Jones has a legitimate chance to start, and this is a 12-team format as well. So I definitely would take the Daniel Jones side. Another one 3 days ago, he was sold for the 308 in 2025. I think the same thing applies here. And 7 days ago, he was sold for Carson Steele and Roschon Johnson. Carson Steele and Roschon Johnson probably aren't going to amount to anything. And so even though it's a 10-team league and quarterbacks aren't quite as important as they are in a 12-team format, it's still a super flex format. And I couldn't imagine any team having Carson Steele or Roschon Johnson as their starting running back. Whereas Daniel Jones, I think, does have the potential to start for the Indianapolis Colts this season. And so to review, the 5 quarterbacks that I think are potential buy low candidates are CJ Stroud, Caleb Williams, Kenny Pickett, T-Law, and Daniel Jones. Remember with CJ Stroud, after that ridiculous rookie season, he was valued as the QB3 despite really not having that much rushing upside. Well, after this significant dip in his second season, I think he is a potential buy low candidate, and he has the potential to be a low-end QB1 any given season. Caleb Williams, he was fine for fantasy at points, but the coaching was terrible for him. The offensive line was terrible, and he didn't help them out whatsoever himself. I think with Ben Johnson, being introduced, along with them really only potentially losing Keenan Allen, which isn't even a guarantee yet, but then also massively upgrading the interior of the offensive line, I think there is a serious bounce back fantasy campaign for him. Then Kenny Pickett, if the Browns don't select Shedeur Sanders or a quarterback at 2, there is a chance that Kenny Pickett starts for them. You can get him for practically nothing. And so if you're in a 12-team Superflex format, I think that is a tremendous buy low because he's basically free. Trevor Lawrence, he had terrible coaching for the past couple seasons. Now he has Liam Cohen. He finally has his wide receiver 1 once again in Brian Thomas. They potentially get help at wide receiver or tight end. I think that is going to be a massive upgrade for him, and he's a bounce back candidate as well. And then Daniel Jones, Anthony Richardson just hasn't been very good. If Daniel Jones is able to start, this would be the best offensive line he's ever had, by far the best assets in the passing game. And then Shane Steichen's offensive play calling, I think there is a ton of upside for him, and he's practically free. All right, so those are 5 potential buy low candidates for you at quarterback with varying price points. Once again, I can't control as to whether you can buy at these price points, but if you can, I would strongly advise it. I think there's a good amount of upside compared to what you'll have to pay for each and every single one of these guys. Remember that this is more so geared towards a super flex format because, some of these guys like Kenny Pickett and Daniel Jones, unless you are truly desperate, you could probably find better options in 1 QB leagues. But yeah, what are your thoughts? Do you think that these are good buy low candidates? Do you disagree? Do you agree or disagree with the price point? Let me know below in the comment section. With that being said, make sure you check out my Patreon. Make sure you like and subscribe. It's a free and easy way to support the channel, and I'd really appreciate it. Thank you and have a good day.